This is the L3 Leadership Podcast, episode number 115. What's up, everybody, and welcome to episode number 115 of the L3 Leadership Podcast. My name's Doug Smith, and I'm the founder of L3 Leadership. We're a leadership development company based out of the city of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, devoted to helping you become the best leader that you can be. If you want to learn more about our organization and connect with us, you can go to l3leadership.org and check everything else out there. If you're new to the podcast, this podcast is intended to help you grow your leadership skills, and every month we are committed to bringing you 3 new episodes. One will always be from our leadership events that we host throughout our city. One's always an interview with a high-level leader, and once a month you'll get a leadership lesson by me as well. And as always, if you've been listening to the podcast, we'd really appreciate if you would hop on iTunes and leave us a rating and review. It really does make a difference. This episode comes to you from our breakfast series, and we had a fantastic breakfast. But before I introduce our speakers, I want to thank our sponsors, BAB Inc. They are an insurance broker, third-party administrator, and consulting firm in Pennsylvania and all across the country, led by my friend Russell Livingston. And he has a huge passion for developing and pouring into next-generation leaders, which is why he hosts our breakfast. And just super impressed with the way they run their business and what they do in our city. So again, if you're looking to connect with an insurance broker, go to Babbins.com, I apologize. That's BABBINS.com, and you can check out everything that they do there. I highly encourage you to reach out to them. So, as I mentioned, this L3 Leadership Podcast episode comes to you from our breakfast series, and we had the honor and privilege of having Jay Passavant, who's the founding pastor of Northway Christian Community, and Father Jay Donahue, who is the head priest at S.S. Simon and Jude Catholic Parish, speak. And originally, I was just going to have Jay Passavant speak on his own. And he said, "Hey, I'm mentoring this Catholic priest on leadership, and it's really transforming the way he's leading his church, and it's transforming his parish. And I really think it would be interesting if I shared leadership principles, and he can talk about how he is taking those principles I'm teaching him and actually having them use them in the church to lead his church." And it was a phenomenal idea, and the breakfast was absolutely fantastic. And so I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. And one thing that's really unique again is Jay is a Protestant, planted Northway Christian Community, one of the largest churches in Pittsburgh, and Father Jay is a priest. And usually it's really hard to get Catholics and Protestants to work together, but you'll hear it's really unique what God is doing in and through this relationship, and really in the church in the Pittsburgh area. So I really think you'll enjoy this. I encourage you to listen to the whole thing. We didn't spend a whole lot of time on Q&A, and so the Q&A, which is usually another episode, is actually covered in this podcast episode at the end as well. If you want to connect with either of the Jays who speak and learn more about L3 Leadership, you can get everything you need in the show notes at l3leadership.org/episode 115. Again, that's l3leadership.org/episode 115. So let's jump right into their talk, and I'll be back at the end with a few announcements. Enjoy.
Well, this is going to be the definition of unscripted. Maybe.
Or spirit-led.
Yeah, it could be that. Yeah, that might be the more positive way to approach this thing. Spirit-led. Well, yeah, when Doug and I chatted about this opportunity, it was just a matter of when for me, not if. I really wanted to be here. I know it's early, and as one of our hosts said to me, the fact that you are up at a meeting like this on a Saturday morning means that either A, you have a really slow life, not much going on, or B, you're spiritually hungry enough to pay the price, get up and hang out. And my hunch will be, after you leave today, if nothing else, we will have given you something to think about in terms of how God may want to open and expand your horizons of leadership. Real quick about who I am, and then Father Jay will give you a quick sort of bio of his background. My ancestors moved here in 1810. So it's one of the few categories where I've got Jay beat in terms of family. His weren't long after. 1810. Have any of you heard of the town of Zelienople? Yes. Zelienople, yes. Well, that was named after my great-great-great-grandmother. Her name was Zeli, And so it means town of Zealand. That's where she actually raised her son, William Alfred Passavant, who was the founder of the Passavant Hospital and 26 other institutions in our area that you don't know about that don't carry our name. So it's fair to say my roots go really, really deep into Pittsburgh. And I'm blessed with one wife. We've been married 46 years in a row. I have 3 adult children, one in New York City, 2 here locally. And my oldest son and his wife and 4 kids under the age of 6 are now living in our house temporarily while theirs gets finished. So if my shoes are on the wrong feet, or you say, he didn't comb his hair, all that's true. I had no idea what I was doing. I was stepping over, one of them left a wagon behind my car when I pulled out. Stuff I'm just not, fortunately they weren't in it. I'm going to get it clear. We're having a blast. And just quickly, after growing up out in Beaver, I went off to college, got my degree. Then it was a time in the world when we were engaged in conflict, and many, many young men, particularly a few young women at that point, of combat age were being conscripted, or in my case, there was a lottery about going into service. I decided when I got my number that I'd rather join the best, so I, by the grace of God, was able to go through Marine Corps officer training and receive my commission, and served about 2 years of active duty and then another almost 4 of active reserve duty, which, if that were today, it was a good chance that I would have seen conflict. There are other Marines in the room who I have great admiration for. Went to Fuller Seminary, got my degree there, and then moved back to Pittsburgh in 1974, became an ordained United Presbyterian pastor. So, did I mention I was born Catholic?
Yes. No, you didn't.
There's reasons why we really hit it off.
You didn't mention that.
I started life as a Catholic. And are there any Catholics here by any chance? One of the few meetings I've ever seen where you're the minority. See how it feels, see how you like this. But when my family moved out to Beaver, my mom was somewhat depressed, couldn't find any place to connect. Someone from a Presbyterian church invited her to a Bible study. She met Jesus, but more important for me, we got connected with other people. And I was ordained in the EP Church 1974. And then in 1980, for reasons too elaborate to get into now, knew that the Lord was calling me out of the Presbyterian Church to launch a non-denominational ministry. And just to be clear, in 1980, non-denominational ministries in Pittsburgh were very few and very far between and generally not understood. But having lived in Southern California for 3.5 years, I'd seen numerous non-denominational ministries such as that, community ministries, the Vineyard, those kind of places. And I knew that there was a movement going on. And so from 1981 to 2011, I, with my wife, established Northway Christian Community. We started with 9 couples in a basement. When I left, there were about 4,000 active members in 5 locations. And all glory to God, it wasn't because I was all that spectacular. It's just that some of the things we're going to talk about today, we implemented with discipline and a lot of prayer. And God bless that. So now I'm in a season where I'm called the founding pastor of Northway, not really retired. So if you hear, I heard that retired pastor and the real pastor. No, I'm still actively involved with my local church, but I have a lot more time now to pursue things that I think the Lord wants me to do. And this relationship with Father Jay, and what we'll talk about briefly, or as long as need be for today, is just one of those things. So, again, thanks for the invitation. Thanks for my handful of friends, our friends that came out today to support us. And I hope that by the time we leave, every one of you smiles at least once. Try right now. Turn the person next to you and flash them the best smile you got. I want to see you do it. I'm watching. Go. Both sides. Yeah. For those of you who had a little bit of that, but you're no problem. Okay, where are we at? Jay, your turn.
We have, I'm John Francis Donahue II, and he's also Jay, so we confuse each other in text messages. So he's J3.
I'm actually John E.
John E. Okay, I'm John F. Okay, so there you go. But he's J3 and I'm J2. So in our text messages, we go back and forth so we don't confuse ourselves with each other. It's a very important part of our relationship. Is I'm J2 and he's J3, and we're both happy that that's the way it is. I come from a really small family. I have 2 brothers. And then I also have 5 sisters. And then on my dad's side, my grandparents had 13 kids. They had 9 girls and 4 boys. And my dad's the oldest son of that crew. Those 13 kids have now 84 grandchildren. And now those 84 grandchildren have 112 great-grandchildren. And the over-under on the great-grandchildren is 250. I'm going with the over on that one. And so it's a small family of about 256 people. And it's in that dynamic that God's word, God's grace, and God's love just really took over and led my life. I can't think of a better way to grow up than to have 5 sisters, 2 brothers, and all this just tremendous love and support as I was nourished growing up. And I realized that most people don't have that as a blessing. But it took me a long time to figure that out. I grew up on Beverly Road in Mount Lebanon, and then we moved over to the east end of Pittsburgh, where I went to Central Catholic, went to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, and in the second year of college, something happened to me that transformed my whole entire life. I thought my grandfather had started Federated Investors. My dad took over that company, and biblically I was set up because I was the oldest son of the oldest son. I used to make fun of my sisters saying, you guys better get in line here because I'm getting all the graces. So they didn't like that. I don't know why. But at any rate, so I just figured, man, as long as I kind of behave and just kind of stay more or less in line, I'm going to be good to go here. So I worked up on the New York Stock Exchange as a summer intern in between my freshman and sophomore year of college. And at the end of that experience, I remember shaking this guy's hand. His name was James Jacobson. And he looked at me and he said, I'd love to have you continue to work with us when you graduate college. And I remember shaking his hand. It was just after a tough day up on Wall Street, and all the paper and all the stuff. Is back in the day when you used pencils, and there weren't all that many computers, but there was enough going on. I remember turning around after he had said that to me, and I felt a little bit like this wasn't where I was supposed to be. I was 20 years old thinking my whole life was going to be headed towards flying the eagle at Federated Investors. And as I got there, I hit this low point thinking, this is not the right fit. And, Augustine has that saying about this restlessness until we rest in God. And there was a restlessness in me that just didn't seem to fit there. So I went back to college and thought, I'm 20 years old. What the heck do I need to know what God wants me to do? So I figured fraternity life was where I really discerned my vocation in life. Phi Kappa Psi, started by Woodrow Wilson. We were the Alpha chapter at UVA. And boy, the parties began on Thursday and they ended on Wednesday. So that was my cyclical lifestyle for a while. My dad got me a car when I was 21 for my birthday. It was a Ford Explorer, and I got the Ford Explorer because in the back of that you could put down the back seats and get 5 kegs of beer. And I thought, this is definitely where I needed to go. Dave Matthews Band had just began, and we used to have him come in and play at our fraternity for a couple bucks, and we thought we were the coolest fraternity around. And then things started to sober up towards the end of October, right near house.
Literally?
Literally.
Yeah, okay.
Literally. One of my dear friends who I'd grown up with had committed suicide, and his mother had called me and was, obviously, we were crying. I was down at UVA, and he was back here when he died. And I realized on that phone call that this was one of my best friends. And I had spent 21 years of my life thinking about myself, my pleasures, my goals, what I could get out of life. And when I hung up that phone with my friend's mom, her name was Barb, I realized I had spent most of my life thinking about myself. It was like that song, Me, Myself, and I was my theme song. So I came back. It was Thanksgiving. You can imagine Thanksgiving at a house similar to this, where my grandparents lived on Beechwood Boulevard. Small family of 200 at that point. My grandmother used to go out and hunt the turkeys and bring them into Thanksgiving dinner. She didn't do that. But at any rate, we were at this Thanksgiving dinner. My grandfather stands up and he says, I'd like to invite any of the kids that'd like to go to Rome on a pilgrimage. And I'm like, oh, what's that all about? And so I'm like, life wasn't working out socially, career-wise. And so all of a sudden, go to Rome. It's New Year's, 1993, first Saturday. It's around 7 o'clock at night. We're in the Vatican, this huge marble building. And this little white guy, whose name was first Carl, he's from Poland, he walks into this room of about 5,000 people. And the joy of tears that you could feel as he walked in just overwhelmed everybody like a tidal wave of love. And as he started to get closer and closer, all I could think of, boy, if I could just shake this guy's hand, something special might happen. There was one obstacle between me and this guy as he was getting closer, and it was this little nun, these little sisters, these women who are just so dear, like Mother Teresa. It wasn't her. And she was between me and this guy coming in. His name was Pope John Paul II. As he got closer, I elbowed her off one side, and he got closer. And I reached out, and I got to just simply shake his hand.
I saw the picture, by the way.
It's in my office.
I will affirm, I saw the picture of Father Jay and John Paul II shaking hands.
And it was at that moment, it was so much different than shaking the hands of Jim Jacobson on the Wall Street, that I realized that this man had given up everything he had. He was a talented actor, athlete, he was a poet, he could write, and Karl Wojtyła was his name, and then he became John Paul II, who was the Pope of the Catholic Church for about 20 years. And it was at that moment that I realized that the greatest joy of my life was going to be allowing Jesus Christ to lead me. And I've always loved Psalm 23 and that simple phrase of He leads me. And it's been a journey. I couldn't go to bed that night. There was this amazing thought in my mind that God was calling me, and I couldn't believe why. And so that was 1993, and here we are, 2016. I felt like along the path, some of the best things that I've done is placed myself in a position to be led by people who could take me up to higher heights and not to feel like I've ever reached the culmination of whatever I'm in. I'm only 43, so I don't think that's too hard. But I studied in an international seminary in Rome. I spent 7 years of missionary work in Mexico. We're engaged in learning languages like Italian and Spanish and just being able to have to set up shop to evangelize in any culture at any time. And we kind of felt like we were the Marines of the church for a long time. At any rate, as I got through this group, it's called a religious community called Legionaries of Christ, I realized that the Lord was calling me back to Pittsburgh. And one of the first people that I got to meet back in Pittsburgh, I was named youth pastor at St. Mary's of the Assumption on Middle Road, was Bubba. And it was so cool. We would come together at a Starbucks. I don't know, where was that Starbucks? Like out in the north. Where was it? Cranberry? In Cranberry, with Bubba and a bunch of other youth pastors. A couple were Catholic, a couple of evangelical Christians, others, I don't know where they were from, but it didn't matter. We just came together and we prayed. And that was my first step back to Pittsburgh after being away for about 20 years. And I hadn't seen Doug Smith for a long time since then. And all of a sudden, we were together praying with the bishop and all these Christian leaders. And I was like, geez, I know I've seen him. And he starts talking about the ministry he's doing at the Light of Life. And then the other day he called me, and it came up, Bubba Smith. And then it dawned on me, that's how we met. And so it's interesting how the Lord leads us in our lives. And most importantly, with those faces of those hearts of those people that truly are close to Christ. And so one of the most meaningful relationships that I've been able to form over the last year is with J2. And J3, I'm J2, sorry. Just testing them.
Sure.
And through a collaborative that I've been honored to be a part of with actually somebody who's Pat Molyneux and Lisa Slayton has kind of brought us together. And this is kind of why we're sitting here today. I'm running a church out in the South Hills called St. Simon and Jude Church on Green Tree Road. And Pittsburgh, as a diocese, is going through a tremendous transition period with the challenge that I think most of us feel in all of our churches of the millennial generation and the challenges of our secular society, the unbiblicalness, you could say, of our leaders, and the foundational parts of who we are as a country are really being questioned now. And so it's now more than ever that I think leadership and trusting that God's going to bring us in contact with leaders that can inspire and bring us to the next level is so critical. And my relationship with Jay has been a blessing, and that's what I hope we can share and dive into now.
Yeah, and Doug handed some folks some outline. I like to go with, just to show you I'm not just winging this, although we've allowed the Spirit. Yes, so if you'll hand those out, you'll see that the very first thing on these outlines is what we've just sort of hinted at. And that is, if you're a leader in whatever field, and we know very well it's not just, most of you are not in pastoral ministry, but I want to make a very important assertion as we start. Is being an effective leader, and I love blanks because it makes us think about what might go there. And leaders, number one, are confident in their calling. Whatever you feel that calling might be. J2 just gave you a very powerful synopsis of how he arrived there. I arrived there an entirely different way. But it wasn't until I had graduated from college and was in the Marine Corps that I realized that I had my own epiphany of sorts, that ministry was the direction, that is full-time ministry, that God was calling me. But the majority of the folks that we talk to, by far, and I think most of you, that's not been your specific calling from God, but I want to underscore here that to be a truly effective leader, you need to know with some level of confidence what your calling is. And it's not, what's the number, Jay? 98% or 99% of the population are not called to full-time ministry. So first thing we want to kind of knock off is the idea that if you're really serious about ministry, you'll either
get collared up.
Yeah. Get in really serious calling like Father Jay's or one like mine, where it's much less disciplined, but I would say equally pleasing in the eyes of the Lord. Take a shot. Who was the first person in the Bible that was called Spirit-filled? I'm not going to put anybody on the hot seat here, because unless you really know, no, it wasn't even Jesus. The first person was a craftsman by the name of Bezalel. Bezalel. Did anyone get that right?
They're all raising their hands.
Well,
I got it wrong. I said Adam.
Yeah. Exodus 31. The Lord confirms that he was called to be the master craftsman over constructing the temple. And I think it's very significant, because far too often people who aren't in public ministry full-time think that, well, I didn't quite make it to where God really uses people. But our conviction, and we share this conviction, is that your calling is every bit as important to fulfill the plans and destiny of God as ours. It's just a little different. But here's the thing. If you're not sure what that calling is, and if you're not sure what your career path or direction is, it's not a cardinal sin, but it will impede you from really having the maximum impact with your life. And so I want to urge you to just circle that one. And if you're not sure what that might be, the very most important thing you can do is to sit down with someone that you trust and share with them that you're going through a difficult time figuring this out. Jay mentioned that he was in his 20s?
Yes.
20s, okay. I would say anywhere in your 20s, you may still be searching for what that calling is, but by the time you reach, your early 30s, I hope by then you kind of know, because that's when things dramatically change. 20s are a time of experimenting, 30s are the time of engaging, 40s are usually your most fruitful and active times. Your 50s are times when you are empowering others, and 60s and beyond, you just go to breakfast. Or wherever you can get free food. The story that we're going to just talk about and not take all the time to read is the one about David and his confrontation with Goliath. It's in 1 Samuel 17. You can look it up later. But how many of you recognize that David didn't start life called into the priesthood? In fact, the primary characters in the Old Testament, Abraham, Elijah, Joseph, Moses, even David, they weren't priests. No offense. They were people who some were ranchers, some were real estate developers. They were just people living lives faithfully where they were. And that's the thing. Once you know what your calling is and you're living life faithfully, here's something to take away with you. At any day, at any given moment in a day, God may cause something to cross your path that will be that sort of missing piece of the puzzle. Father Jay really beautifully described his. I hope if we went around the room, you might be able to say, well, this is where I feel like my calling became really pretty clear. And now I'm giving myself to be the very best at what I'm called to do. And by the way, for your leadership to rise to the full potential that it could, two things need to converge. Your passion and your giftedness. Your passion, and those two things have got to converge in your calling. Because you can be passionate about something, but if you're not very gifted, it's a push. And if you're gifted in a particular area, but you're not called of God to be in there, then that's not going to fulfill His purpose in your life. I'll say one more thing here. And Father Jay and I have talked about this a ton. When the passion and giftedness combine, when you know you're doing what God's called you to do, you really don't work a day in your life. After 42 years of full-time ministry as a calling, I don't ever remember myself getting upset, I got to go to work today. Except on one Sunday morning when I was sleeping in, and I said, I just don't want to go in. Carol said, you're the pastor, you got to go. And so it's just the truth. It's the best way to live life is not get a job and slug it out. It's allow your calling and your giftedness to converge, and then you're going to be blessed. One of the things that drew me to Father Jay in this area was, because I didn't know this man. I mean, we were basically like, this was an arranged marriage.
It really was. Thank you, Pat and Lisa.
Yeah, Pat. You all figured this out pretty well. But neither one of us might have felt like, good guy, but this is not for me. But actually, it was the absolute converse of that. We met for almost 3 months, just the two of us, wherever we could connect, downtown somewhere. Just got to know each other. And if I were to retitle this little message today, I would entitle it, Leadership is not about what you do, as much as it is about who you are. Who you are will eventually be the message that you live out in front of people. I can't tell you how many people put aside that issue of character, of love for Christ. And they try to offset it by developing their skills. There's a guy by the name of Henry Cloud that's coming here to Pittsburgh in a couple of months. And John Nuzzo happens to be one of my very best pastoral friends up in Cranberry, is bringing Henry Cloud in. And you might want to check that website. Just go there and check out. That might be something worth an investment. But here's something he said. The most important tool, ultimately, is the person and his or her makeup. And yet it seems to get the least amount of attention and work. Mostly we focus on professional skills and knowledge instead of character. Now, it's not a dismissal. I think you should be well-tuned in your craft, but it is an appeal to not overlook the most important thing, which is your relationship with God and how that flows through you. I watched Father Jay with great appreciation because I see him living out his life with his people. And what's it called when what you say and how you act line up? Integrity. Integrity. I've seen that, and that's been my appeal. And he doesn't, it's interesting, of all the priests that I've known, he does not have this priestly kind of, he doesn't flip into a priestly gear where he talks holy or something. He just doesn't. What you're seeing up here is how he is with his people. Here's the thing. The people love that. They're flocking to that. So would you agree?
Oh, absolutely. And the thing is I didn't know, I was ignorant. I'd been in Pittsburgh, hadn't followed the churches here too much, and so I had no idea what Northquake Community was. Didn't know who Jay Passavant was. He was sitting in my rectory. We were having lunch, and he was just a nice man that was sitting there, and I had no idea who he was. But what impressed me, and this is why I wanted to even go deeper into this relationship of him being my pastor coach, so to speak, was his ability to just pray. His ability to connect with Christ. If my calling was to lead others to Christ, then I needed somebody who was very well connected with Christ to be able to lead me. And whatever field that is, it's so important to connect with those people who truly do connect with our passion and can help nourish that, that can help feed that, and also detect those times when perhaps we've kind of gone astray from that passion. And I had been working in my ministry at St. Simon and Jude. When I got there, I was very overwhelmed with all the things that were needed to be done. And I ended up getting double pneumonia and had 104 fever for 4 days. And the worst part of that is I hate the New England Patriots. And I woke up through this double pneumonia bout, and the Super Bowl was on. It was in February, and I just realized that Tom Brady had won the Super Bowl. It was a couple of years ago. And I think that put me in a tight spiral down as well.
That's called depression.
Yeah, okay. That's a good way to look at it. And so what I was in need of was somebody who could help pace me as a pastor. Because as a young person, I wanted to just go out and save the world for Jesus. And I get up every morning with the same passion that I felt when that little white guy came into that room in Rome. And my problem is that I wasn't taking care of myself. I was confident in my call, but I wasn't sure exactly the right tools to implement and the right way to have that happen. And so having somebody like Jay to talk to and to bounce ideas off and to challenge me was a blessing in my mind. And so as you try to initiate actions and do things, you realize it's so easy to just drain yourself, but then you forget about yourself. And Jay has been a great inspiration in that he's a little bit older than me, but I can see somebody who's learned how to pace his life balance his family, his wife, his children, his grandchildren. He just had twin grandchildren. And you see that and you say, okay, I'm not married, so we're totally different when it comes to that type of calling. But we do have something that's so in common, which is our mission as pastors to try to bring that peace and joy of God into the living rooms of the hearts of those people that we're with. And that everybody needs. So I'll never be unemployed. But at the same time, I could drain myself completely and not have the energy and the enthusiasm and the health to be able to commit to that type of mission.
Yeah, I hope you're hearing that. That's just so important, because it's easy to get off track and burn out, and then you start questioning everything about what it is you're called to do. And in fact, the second little blank there in your outline says that true leaders initiate action. They don't wait for something to happen. They don't just sit back. When I was more hands-on in leading in my ministry, I had the 80-20 rule, which is if you're in full-time ministry, I'm expecting you to initiate 80% of the contacts that you have. 20% are responding to people in needs. Now, I know that may sound like really unusual for a pastor, someone to take care of it, but you know what I saw in Jay? This is real important. The reason why I hope you'll allow for us to be talking about the context of our ministries, where these same principles apply no matter where you are in the marketplace. For example, just seeing a Protestant and a Roman Catholic working together and not stumbling over issues that Protestants and Catholics have battled over for centuries. I want that to be a visual lesson to you, that perhaps the very best person to help you move on in your ministry, in your leadership, is someone you might ordinarily dismiss for some. He very lovingly and unusually gently called me the older one.
The more experienced one.
No, yeah, I get it. But,
and the married one.
Well, that is really true. But the thing that I have observed in a lot of millennials, for example, some of which are you all, you have a reticence of tapping into people, older people, who've been down that road that you're heading into. And to me, it's just really, really silly. Why would you want to go and make your own mistakes if someone could help you to not head in that direction and waste a year or two of your life? So again, this applies across the board. Don't eliminate people because of age difference. Don't eliminate them because of past experiences, or maybe how in general you've always perceived them, this group of people, as being. There's an enormous amount of available knowledge and inspiration if you'll just be willing to step outside of your box a little bit, which we've kind of had to learn to do. And that's come easy. It's not been a difficult thing. So we initiated action.
And I initiated a lot of action. I looked at my church, I looked at our community, and realized the amount of marriages that were in tough situations. So we started a marriage ministry, a foundation called Renew the I Do. I'd realized that the youth needed challenge, so we were doing missionary work down in Jamaica, and then we'd do things down in West Virginia, and we had all these things going on. And that's where it was just like I was doing way too many things, not really learning the best way to pace myself. And so I was initiating a lot of action, but what I found in Jay was how to start leading, not necessarily by diving into everything, but by creating a good team around me and by entrusting them and empowering them and inspiring them. And one of the things that he told me from the beginning, and again, we're going to use ministry as an example, but I think you can apply it to your own life, is just to know yourself, to know what are the ways in which you need the exercise, the way in which you need the proper sleep, the way in which you need the proper relax and rest in order to be able to be energized for the ministry. And so we talk about that, and I see it in him. In fact, I couldn't believe I was at his house with his wife, and we're sitting there with his cat just talking and having a good time. It's not like every time we get together, it's these intense things of like, okay, what are the top 5 priorities of your life right now? It's more of a relationship that's built on the fact that we care about each other, and that care is what is necessary to then be able to, I think, care about those people who I've surrounded myself at my church.
My first recollection that something significant was happening is when I was sharing with Father Jay early on about how I saw church ministry, and particularly a pastoral calling being expressed, was Ephesians 4:13. For God has called some to be apostles, others prophets, others evangelists, others pastors and teachers, so that the body can be equipped for the work of ministry. When I read that scripture or shared it with Jay, I've not seen him get hyper emotional at any time, but I saw him, lights went on. I mean, he leaned forward and he said, that's what we need. Not for me to be doing everything, which, because he's such an innately loving human being and anointed by the Holy Spirit, he hates to say no. He wants to be. But when you have 4,000 people in your parish, not realistic. So we got about the business of what does it mean then to equip these people so they can go out and they can be the ones going to someone's home and sharing, being the volunteers to help make it. It was just a completely game-changing sort of paradigm. Jay mentioned number 4 in your outline, which is leaders build great teams. They recognize they can't do it all. We won't turn there, but all this, fortunately, is on your notes, and you can look. David had what was called his mighty men, and it lists them in the Bible and how they were the ones that implemented the work. And I want to say, what we have been experiencing over the past months is really remarkable. Here's how it's been going. We met for several months, just getting to know each other, as Jay described. No real agenda, but real honest. And then at some point, I said, I think it's time for us to try to begin to get your staff, the people that work with you, to get them on board with this idea of making disciples. And one verse that became sort of the cornerstone of our value system is 2 Timothy 2:2. These things which you've heard from me, entrust to reliable men who will be able to teach others as well. 2 Timothy 2:2. Because what that does, it changes the focus of your strategy from responding to whatever to identifying who are the people who are, quote, reliable, or in some translations, faithful. These are the people that aren't going to take what you give them and just squander it away. They're going to go out, and here's the key, they're going to go on out and reach others. Friends, it's the difference between simple addition and multiplication. So what happens?
And so building a team like this, I remember a story of my grandfather who, when he was thinking about starting Federated Investors, he had some friends that he'd gone to Central Catholic, and he was very poor growing up, washing cars just barely to buy books and food, and ended up getting a scholarship there and helped him get to West Point. He graduated from West Point, was one of the most successful people at West Point. He was a Top Gun pilot. This was before the Air Force became its own entity. He came back to Pittsburgh, and he had been studying this thing called mutual funds, which at the time had been a disaster because of the 1930 Depression and all that. And he thought this was what he needed to be doing, was getting into mutual funds. And one of his buddies, his name was Dick Fisher, He was selling used Cadillacs or used cars at the time. And he goes up to him, and he hadn't seen him in a while, and he walks into his, whatever used car lot. And there's nothing wrong with used cars. But anyway, my grandfather looked at it and he said, do you imagine yourself in 20 years selling used cars and being able to fulfill the goals that you have? And just laid it right out at him. And he's like, no. And that was the start of my grandfather's success into Federated, because he had this ability to attract people with a vision and say, here's where we're headed. Do you want to get on the bus? And from that, he started such a very successful enterprise in Federated and was able to build a culture around just some basic values of humanity, of Christianity, and of his family life. And so he was never afraid of casting and really building a team based on this vision that he felt God put in his heart. And that's what helped determine who were the people that should be on the bus. Good, the great thing, get the right people on the bus, the wrong people off, and then try to... So that's kind of what he did.
So actually, again, by the way, Father Jay had not seen this outline until this morning. It's one of the things I like to do, just to test him. He just told you number 3.
Oh, yeah. Check.
Did you know? Leaders cast vision. That's what they do. And I put a little simple sentence there, but it's very important. The definition of a leader is one who empowers others to see a vision of a better future and inspires them to find their role in creating it. We are so deprived of strong vision. And you here represent the folks that have the potential of casting a vision for a better future and then empowering others to fill it.
And to me, why would I accept Bubba's invitation to come here? Because anybody who's willing to get up early to start thinking about how their gifts can be used to inspire others, whether it be in whatever field, I wish I could know all the fields of interest here, then I'm interested. Because I think that you all here because something is in your heart that just wants to explode and inspire others to do. And the fact that you'd invest time in leadership, I hope it means that you're actually investing time in this vision and getting passionate about it. Because what I've seen in my grandfather, what I've seen in J. Passavant, what I've seen in Pope John Paul II, is that vision never gets tired. It's always renewed, refreshed, and just like, yeah, every morning it gets you out of bed, even when I hate getting up in the morning. I don't even know why I'm up now. But at any rate, that's what it does to you. It just builds this passion, and it connects you and lets you see the gifts of that.
Yeah, and well, our experience is that people are just waiting for someone to do that, because somewhere in the neighborhood of 90% of the population does not have a leadership gift. And by the way, I say this on the outline, and it's worth, we don't have time to, everybody has some measure of leadership. Everybody. But not everyone is really called with that gift. So, figure it out. If that's one of your apparent gifts, your obligation is to cultivate that. If it's not, then your obligation is to learn as much as you can and be faithful to the principles that Scripture provides. And that's where you will see things begin to change. So let me tell you how this worked out. So after our 3 months together, I said, it's time that we go and just see how real can we get here. Let's invite your staff to a weekly Bible study.
Which for Catholics is a very strange concept.
Well, it's not strange to Protestants, they just don't do it. But Catholics, but you have to, it's hard to paint this picture with enough emotion for me. So we're sitting around a round table. Father Jay and I selected a very, I think, high quality, Catholic approved New Testament with lots of notes in it. And we began to study the Gospel of Mark. Every week, we met for 90 minutes. And at first, it was sort of quiet. There was one or two people who would chime in, but it just was a little difficult. But a remarkable thing happened over the next months. And it's funny, one of the more senior members of the team shared with us just last Thursday how when we started this thing, he was saying, oh man, another stinking meeting I got to go to. Is that the word he used? It's close to that. He didn't want to do it. Would you believe that right now he's totally transformed his perception? He loves what we do, as do the other folks. There's only one exception. This person has just multiple other conflicts, but the whole team has embraced this. Okay, great. So now we have 8 or 9 people. Now where do we go? And just through our conversation, we determined we've got to get more folks on this bus. If we're to meet the needs and meet the opportunities, we've got to get more folks. So we did a Life in the Spirit seminar and got some interest, but then a huge thing happened this past Thursday I want Father Jay to tell you about.
So in the Catholic Church, one of our biggest problems is that we have about a third of our group, our constituents, that will show up to Sunday worship. And of those, a very small percentage actually have their skin in the game. And so it's like, well, how do we invite people to have an experience of Christ to the point where they want to be disciples of Christ, learn from the Lord, love the Lord, and let the Lord's love lead them? And that's where Jay's leadership has helped me so much to see the importance of small groups, the importance of what Jesus did, which was so obvious. It's like, okay, yeah, I should have thought of this a while ago. Calling his disciples to just live and eat and just go fishing and just be together as a small group. And so we created this small group first with my staff. So I have a care minister, I have somebody who's in charge of the youth ministry, somebody who does the preschool ministry, and so we have this team that gets together, and that's what Jay was talking about. So now, when we first did this, there was all kinds of, oh man, another hour and a half of my work week. What are you doing to us here? And they had no idea.
You're killing us with all this Bible stuff.
Nobody knew who this young gentleman next to me was. And so they're like, what in the world's going on here? And then things just started to open up. We started to share our lives. People would come in with real stuff going on and just cry. And then we were able to support, and some good moments and some difficult moments. And that's when you know you're starting to connect. And so with this, it was called a Life in the Spirit seminar, which is very simple praise and worship, a very powerful, inspirational speaker or message, small group discussion, and then at the end, just some fellowship. Very simple concept. It wasn't like rocket science. We had 350 people coming each week. And in a Catholic environment like that, it wasn't a Sunday, so it wasn't like obligation time. It was like they were coming because they wanted to be there. Right. We had parking problems, which I like parking problems at a church. That's a good sign when you have a parking problem. And so we felt like, well, this is a good time to start to do the third tier. If the first relationship with Jay and I, the second was Jay and I with my team of immediate staff members. The next was to have the staff members be able to run a small group.
All right, pause there. You got to understand what a big deal this was. Because these folks had not done that, with maybe one exception. To lead a Bible study where the priest wasn't going to be there?
In fact, we're going to launch it next Tuesday.
Yeah.
All of us priests in the Diocese of Pittsburgh are going to be at the Bishop at Ogle Bay for a 4-day conference.
He's leaving me on the day we're doing this.
They're all going to come, the people that were at this Life in the Spirit. I don't know how many are going to show up yet, but they're going to come on Tuesday, next Tuesday. And they're going to do an hour of prayer. And then afterwards, the staff is going to organize 13 small groups.
How many?
13.
13. We were quietly praying that even if we could get them to go out 2 by 2, we'd get 4 new groups. How did we get to 30? I don't even know how did you do 13 with 8 volunteers, 8 leaders?
Some of the lay leaders, some of my staff members wanted to do 2 or 3 small groups. And the person that was giving us the most resistance, he was my music minister. He is our music minister. He came up with this concept that I thought was really beautiful for a small group, to study and sing the Psalms, which were written by King David to soothe and heal the heart of Saul. And when he did that,
So imagine how our feeling. I mean, we're going to start Tuesday potentially with 13 groups. Now, that step will take some time. There'll be some ups and downs. But friends, 6 months from now, or at the next really well-timed intersection with the people's flow of the calendar year, we're going to go and believe that those 13 are all going to be able to start their own and maybe even multiply some. And now we're going to be getting it somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 to 30 small groups. Do you see what's happening? Of 8 to 10 people each. We're really just 2 generations away from seeing a dynamic renewal in this congregation. So much so, if Father Jay could sit there and say in front of his staff, it's very likely that in about a year and a half, I may not be here. And because of this diocese shakeup.
What's going on above us in the Catholic Church is going to be a major renovation and changes of parish structure where we're looking at models of bringing 10 churches into one. And they're starting to think of churches in the groups of 20 and 30 and 40,000 number. Right now I only have 4,000. And so for me, I can't control that. And I don't know if you're in businesses or you have bosses or people above you that could actually threaten the very presence of what you're doing now. And so I felt like the most important thing I can give my staff and my community is a strength of a relationship with Christ in a small community setting. So it doesn't matter who their priest is, what building they're worshiping, and what time Mass is, so to speak. But they're disciples of God, and they're connected with Christ. And it's that underlying character integrity that's going to make them to be the type of person they can be despite the changes that they don't control going around them, and not being frustrated with the fact that I'm not making these decisions, they're not going to be making these decisions, but the things that I can't control are not going to define us as persons. Because we could spend the whole day complaining about the weather being bad, the government being corrupt, and the presidential elections going to whatever. You can say that, and that's fine. But let's start thinking about what we can control and what we can influence and inspire those people around us to be able to live like that.
Absolutely. And let me say that, again, he's sneaking in. This is the number 5. Leaders cultivate this integrity. That's what Jay's been doing now. Instead of seeing this potential change as the end of the road for St. Simon and Jude, here's my key word in all my leadership exploits, if you will. Write it down because it's not on your outline. It's ownership. Ownership. If you're doing a capital campaign to raise money, you want ownership. If you're starting a ministry initiative to reach people, you want ownership. If you're an entrepreneurial business person and you want your company to, you gain ownership. Because when people own it, you no longer need to motivate them. You no longer need to look over. They're fired up. In fact, they'll do things you didn't even think they knew what to do. They're on fire. Why? Because they own it. And that dream that Father Jay first resonated with about his people doing the work of ministry, I think you now see how it might happen. In fact,
yeah, I do. And I think, what time do we want to finish? I don't want to go on any.
We're ready for questions now, but you go ahead.
Okay. Well, then one last thought here is that the having the skin in the game, the ownership, is what's most exciting to me. I am not a parent. I don't have children. But I can imagine that one of the greatest things for a parent to see is their child happy, healthy, and I would suggest also holy. And the opposite is true. I asked my brother-in-law, who has 9 kids, to my sister, obviously, and I said, what's the hardest thing about being a dad? And he didn't even have to think about it. He's saying, seeing my sins reflected in my children. And so at the heart of leadership comes to that ability to be able to rejoice at knowing that the good characteristics that you have a chance to inspire others, but also the humility to be able to offer to God the glory when you know, hey, my limits are there. We got to let grace take over. And so it's really beautiful. I know my limits. I don't have the experience, the intellect. I don't know Scripture the way this man does. I don't have the success of looking back at 40 years. He just brought together all these youth kids that he used to pastor. After 40 years, they got together and did this amazing reunion. I don't have that. I don't think I ever might have that. But what I do know is that God's called me to this. I'm convinced of that. And I'm going to allow his love to lead my life. And I hope that each of us realize that God's given us these beautiful gifts that we have in our hearts. And whatever profession we're in, we have a chance to really bring that out in what we do and say. And Jay said something at the beginning that I love. It's not about what you do, it's about who you are. And I would say that's true. And there's another depth to that, especially those of us who believe in God and are Christians. It's not what you do, it's not who you are, it's whose you are. And that's where that integrity, that's where the vision casting, that's where a lot of this kind of gets summed up to me. And he'll have to tell you the scripture passage, but I love it when David's being called. And as he's just about to get anointed, the brothers all run around saying, what the heck's this guy doing here? And there's that phrase that just is, it's not about the exterior, it's that God sees into the heart. And that's where we can really make a lot of our growth and leadership.
When you guys are putting together a team, what do you look for in the ideal team member?
Well, what I first looked for in the people that I've assembled on my team was seeing if they wanted to be a part of this vision that I was casting for them in the church. So as I was interviewing them, I'm saying, this is where we're headed. This is where we want to go. So first of all, for them to be able to connect to that vision and say, this is something that I would like to get a part of. So they have to freely assent to that. It's not just saying, we're going, and if you get on this, you have to go for it. Because in the end, I'm not going to be sitting there card punching with them and telling them what to do. I want them to have the freedom to be able to expand that. So if they capture the vision, want to be a part of that, that's a key characteristic for them. Secondly is just to know a little bit more about their personal lives. At least in the church, it's important that integrity is lived at home, at the workplace, and where they are. And so to be able to see and understand a little of their personal life is important for me to be able to match that up with the community that we're going to be having them serve. So that integrity comes also from their personal life. And lastly, to me, it's giving them some chance, because I can't say I'm the best person at hiring people or at that, but
You're not best at firing them, I'll tell you that.
Right, that's true too.
He hates to fire people.
I do.
He says, I'm sorry, but you're fired. No, it's just pastoral heart. It's a hard time doing that.
That's very true. I agree with that. But what I was getting to is leaving some time. Usually when I hire somebody, give them time to get involved in the ministry, see if that's for them, and do kind of a buffer period in which they can know whether or not this is the right fit for them.
And Dan, if I can add one specific, my first measure is, do I like to be with them? Do I enjoy being with them? If I don't really like them, or if we're not, then why would I want them to be on a team where I'm going to have to see them all the time? I know that may sound obvious, but if you're wowed by somebody's credentials and look at all that and achievements and don't really see them as a person, you can get stuck with some really weird people.
It's a really unique thing that Catholics and Protestants in this situation are working together well. What's enabled you to actually make that happen and work together?
I think what the commonality here is that we have a common mission. And so whether, if you look at a football team, whether you're good at punting, throwing, blocking, or tackling, the goal is to win the Super Bowl. Even though a punter probably doesn't hang out with, Alejandro Villanueva, who's this big guy, or Roethlisberger might not hang out with some of the other guys on the team, they have a common mission. And I think that was the first thing it's one of the things that I think keeps us together, is recognizing that we both have this great passion to help pastors, to help our communities, to be able to free them to follow Christ. And then secondly, I think that we recognize our differences, but we don't dwell on them or use that to fester. I think of a marriage, of good marriages that I've been able to see, and it's not like they ignore or simply just pretend that the differences aren't there. They're able to communicate about them in a loving way. and not force each other into things and rub them. So there's a gentleness when we both experience, okay, these are differences, but it doesn't trump the overall goal that we have of working together for the mission that we have. I don't know what you would say, Jay.
Well, I would say, in my experience, I have not seen this kind of a relationship, period. And I will tell you, had a lot of disappointment and frustration. 1993, I was on the Billy Graham steering committee for, I think it was, maybe that was his last visit personally. I think it was. And we were not able to make a vital connection with the Catholic Church. And friends, at a minimum, 50% of the people in this area are Catholic. So if half of your population base isn't really going in the same direction, it's difficult. Now, does that mean we agree on? No, we've not even pounded through those. But the commonality is such that we can make disciples and get going. And then down the road, I'm blessed by the fact that the Bishop of Pittsburgh and a former very high-profile leader of Protestant ministries, Reed Carpenter, they called selected folks from around the city together to pray. And we haven't said this enough, but prayer is what makes previously impossible things come to pass. There's so much power in prayer. It brings down fear, it brings down walls. So that's something we endeavor to do and our people do. So.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for listening to the J&J's talk. I hope you enjoyed it. For ways to connect with them and what they're up to, you can go to the show notes at l3leadership.org/episode 115, and you'll find everything that you need there. I want to thank our other sponsor, 068, led by my friend Daniel Bull. They're a company that starts companies with ex-convicts, and they are transforming lives on a daily basis, and you can check out their work at 068.org. I really encourage you to check them out and find ways to support them. As always, if you enjoy the podcast, we'd appreciate if you would subscribe and leave a rating and review. It helps us spread the word. Thank you so much for listening. We don't take you for granted at all. We appreciate each and every one of you who listen. And lastly, if you want to stay in touch with us and everything that we're doing here at L3 Leadership, you can sign up for our email list at l3leadership.org, and you also get a free copy of my ebook, Making the Most of Mentoring, which is my step-by-step process for getting meetings with leaders. As always, I love to leave you with a quote, and this quote comes from Tensley Ullman, and he said, "Success isn't about being better than people around us. It's about making the people around us better." And I love that. I thought that was so fitting for this podcast, given Jay's influence in Father Jay's life. I'm grateful that Jay Passavant doesn't just think about himself, but he thinks about investing in others. So thank you for listening and being a part of L3 Leadership. Laura and I appreciate you so much, and we'll talk to you next episode.